Hi, and welcome to the Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. Within living memory, within my lifetime, in fact, gay men faced legal persecution. To be gay was to be a crime until the anti-gay laws of the 60s were repealed in the 60s. When I was a young man, not even that young a man, Margaret Thatcher was in power, and she was passing laws treating the promotion of homosexuality as promotion of some evil vice. AIDS was killing gay men in horrible numbers, and right-wing society, not just right-wing society, in fact, treated their deaths not as a cause for mourning, but as a cause of satisfaction. God was punishing sinners. It was that, or if you didn't believe in God, you say nature was punishing unnatural men. The turnaround has been one of the most extraordinary changes in history, I think. Within the space of 20 odd years, there's been full gay liberation, full gay equality, even gay marriage. Now, people don't even use the word gay and lesbian anymore. They talk of, and you've got to take a big breath here before I get onto this one, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, forgive me, I got it wrong. LGBTQIA plus equality, which means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, asexual, or aromantic equality, plus anything else you might think of. Everyone has a giggle about this in private, not at work, incidentally. In a lot of workplaces, you'd be in trouble if you giggled in the workplace, but particularly when they find out that asexual means experiences little or no sexual attraction. And the joke is, yeah, that's everyone in a long-term relationship. All right, all right, all right. We can go on like this. We can go on and on like this. We can mock. But what a wonderful world we live in, eh? What a marvellous world. Whereas a few decades ago, there were queer bashers on the streets. There were queer bashers in Downing Street, frankly. Queer bashers in government. Queer bashers running police forces. Now, history has so much arced towards justice, to use Martin Luther King's phrase. We can now worry about people who don't have enough sexual attraction. What a wonderful world. Into this beautiful picture of progress comes our guest this week, Ronan McCrea, who is Professor of Constitutional and European Law at University College London and has just published The End of the Gay Rights Revolution. It is an immensely worried and fearful book that essentially says the gains of the past 60 years can always be reversed. Ronan, welcome to the Lowdown.
Thanks for having me on, Nick. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you because it is a fact. I actually said when I wrote about it, it's a hand grenade of a book. It explodes so many ideas that we take for granted. I mean, let's just cut to the quick here. Why do you think the gay rights revolution is in danger?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is how that the gay rights revolution is actually an incidental side effect of a whole load of broader changes. So the analogy I take in the book is it's like Estonian independence. Definitely a lot of Estonians had to fight hard and be brave to get that. But Estonia was never going to be independent if the USSR hadn't collapsed. It was dependent on a whole load of other wider developments. And the gay rights revolution is the same. In the book, I go through the history and show that what basically happened was in the course of the kind of 60s and onwards, straight people gave themselves a lot more sexual freedom, abortion, contraception, premarital relationship, cohabitation, and they changed the meaning of marriage, no fault divorce. And then, having established that choice and freedom-centered approach for themselves, they had to be prodded and reluctantly agreed to provide the same for gay people. And what is important for, I think, gay people to realize is because that was an incident, our liberation was effectively an incidental side effect, it's really vulnerable to being changed. Because what really worries me now is all of the broader forces that drove that advance in gay rights, which the straight sexual revolution, liberalism, secularism, feminism, they're all fading in strength. And that means that we're in a really vulnerable position. And if you look at it in the context of history, as you rightly said, we've had a couple of decades of equality, of tolerance, and maybe 10 of equality, 10 years of equality. In the context of centuries of oppression, that's just the blink of an eye. So we should realize that we're doing pretty well in historical terms, exceptionally well. It's an exceptional situation. It could easily be reversed. It's not, history didn't have this unidirectional thing where you have centuries of oppression, then you have decriminalization, then marriage, the end. It keeps going. And if you look at the US and you look at the UK and Europe too, the broader forces are all weakening. We're in a vulnerable position. And instead of trying to hang on to what we have, a lot of gay rights groups have kind of fallen into the hubristic notion that history's on their side. And instead of thinking, let's just try and hang on to the unprecedented freedom we have, they keep thinking they can go further, they can up their demand, they can widen their agenda. And that, to me, is making it more likely that we're going to lose the amazing freedom that we've won.
So the very label, the LGBTQIA plus movement, this constant adding of new sexual minorities, you feel is a hostage to fortune.
Yeah, I mean, right from the start, there's been tension in the gay rights movement between people who saw the aims of the movement as effectively just ending discrimination against gays and lesbians, allowing gays and lesbians to be the end of their exile from mainstream society, and people who saw the gay rights movement as just part of this broader, a revolutionary movement that would change all norms around sex, gender, relationships. And as I see it, the period of greatest success was in the 1990s and 2000s and 2010s, when more moderate forces were in control, when the agenda was, let's get employment protections, let's get access to civil marriage. We just need a tweak. Accommodating us does not require anything beyond stopping persecuting us and giving us fair play. Now, the LGBTQIA plus approach is the opposite. It puts the gay rights movement into this open-ended revolutionary commitment to change all norms around gender, sex, family relationships. And actually, if you think of the symbol plus, the Gay Rights Center of New York says plus stands for gender identities and sexual orientations that words cannot yet describe. Now, if your pitch to the straight majority, on whom gay people always depend for their political freedom, is that our movement or accommodating us requires changes that are so extensive that they need a mathematical symbol to represent genders and sexual orientations that cannot yet be described, that is political suicide. It means that all the moderate straight support on which we'd rely will be alienated. Instead of saying, you don't need to do much to accommodate us, we're saying, oh no, accommodating us requires you to change everything. And that, for a minority of under 5%, it's just madness.
Yes, one point your book emphasizes very strongly, Rowan, is actual gay and lesbian people are a real minority. 2 to 5%, I think, he figures. So am I right in thinking a part of your critique is, okay, if you're young today, you can call yourself queer. Anyone can be queer, apparently. You can call yourself non-binary. You can call yourself, I don't know, gender fluid. But if hard times ever come, you can snap straight back to being straight, because that's what you really are, and then leaving gays and lesbians on their own.
Well, actually, this point came out really well. I think 2 days ago, there was a polls of college students in the US, and it shows that there has been a crash in the numbers of people who describe themselves as not heterosexual. The number of actual gays and lesbians has stayed the same, but the number of people who say that they're queer or questioning or blah, 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 that's gone into decline already. So what that shows is, I don't, there was a tendency to, in the kind of heyday when it looked like history was on the side of gay rights, that people brought more and more numbers of people identifying with this amorphous LGBTQ plus category. But already that's changing. And also just think about it, the category LGBTQ plus is completely divorced from social reality. If someone says to you, I'm LGBTQ plus, you don't know who they're attracted to or what their gender identity is until you have to ask all these follow-up questions. Nobody talks like that. And it's really dangerous for a rights movement to use a vocabulary and concepts that are completely divorced from social reality. It really alienates.
Okay, look, I want to come back to that, Ren, but I think a lot of listeners could be saying, all right, interesting argument, but where is this threat to gay rights? We are in this world where the world of the BBC, the world of rainbow policemen with rainbow flags on their cars. Come on, come on, this is a panic, isn't it? Where is this threat to gay men and lesbians? Where's it coming from?
Okay, well, there's a few sources. So first, let's take a few different sources. One is look at the right in America. Until 4 or 5 years ago, the right in America has never been the friend of gay rights, but the small state conservatism of Ronald Reagan and those people at least shared a kind of common set of vocabulary and principles with the gay rights movement. Small state, personal freedom. That small state conservative tradition has now been eclipsed. The wing of the Republican Party that's now in control is the J.D. Vance wing, who takes as his intellectual mentor this guy called Patrick Deneen from Notre Dame University, who explicitly endorses post-liberal conservatism, which includes the enforcement of religious morality by the state. And you see, 3 years ago, 56% of Republicans were in favor of gay marriage. It's now 41%. So the right is, and you see Viktor Orban, or in Poland, the PIS party, those post-liberal forms of conservatism are on the rise, and they see gay rights as one of their top targets. Other sources, go on, sorry, yeah.
No, I was just making the point. Sorry, Ronan, for interrupting. If you look at Russian tyranny used to have a conspiracy theory about the West, and it used to be anti-Semitism. It used to say the democracy, the freedom of the West is all an illusion. The Tsars would say, the protocols of the elders of Zion reveal that it's secret. These are just lies that the Jews tell to maintain their power. The communists, Stalin and the and the communists after Stalin, just replaced Jews with Zionists, very much like today's left. And again, it's all Zionist control, Zionist plots. There wasn't great difference between the communists and the Tsars. Putin uses exactly the same language. He says, don't believe in Western democracy. It's an illusion. They're secretly controlled by the gays, by depraved sexual minorities. LGBT plus, gay people, lesbians, trans people have taken the place of Jews in the conspiracy theory of Russian autocracy now.
Well, it is, I mean, I would think it is strange that it is like the Jews in the early 20th century, where this very numerically small group of people have played this weirdly central role in illiberal politics. So same in Poland, in the 2023 queer and LGBT and hate, transliterated into Polish, HEJT, had to be were the words of the year in Poland, because they're so prominent in the general election. And it is interesting that, to me, and frightening, how central gay people are to the Putin agenda and his fellow travelers. And I think the problem with that is what Putin is saying is, no, it's not about just being left alone. It's not about equal treatment. These people want you to change everything about your society. And by expanding from LGB to LGBTQ+, this open-ended revolutionary commitment to change, a lot of gay groups are helping him to make that case to moderate voters. He's saying they want you to change everything about your society, and an LGBTQ+ approach helps him to make that case. It's really dangerous for us, because it's not only in the US. Interestingly, in the UK, in France, the numbers of people who say that homosexuality is morally acceptable are now declining for the first time in 40 years. They had been just steadily rising. That, the change is not yet huge, but there's a definite change. It's no longer rising, it's falling. And people are much more vulnerable than gay people are much more vulnerable than they realize. Like, look at the US, how quickly it changed. And look how quickly things that we think are unimaginable become the norm. Imagine, who would have thought that not accepting the results of a presidential election, excuse me, wouldn't be political suicide, but that's gone. People now think, oh, but sure, whoever really had a problem with gays? Well, actually, look back. It was only in 2010 that the number of British people who said that homosexuality was always acceptable exceeded those who said it was unacceptable always or sometimes. It's so recent and it can change like that. And all of the political dynamics are now that had sustained the gay rights movement and given it energy for 50 years are now fading.
You are listening to The Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. Our guest this week is Professor Ronan McCrea, who's written a really powerful book, an alarming book, on the end of the gay rights revolution. Ronan, let's get to the nub of this, because I want to tease out a problem in your thinking. You say, look, we can't, gay men and lesbians, we need to form our own organisations. Now, before I get any further, we ought to say that is happening in a way that polite society doesn't really understand. But there are lesbian, gay, and bi organisations that absolutely exclude trans and queer and questioning and asexuals and all the rest of it. They are there just to defend themselves. Is that's a fair point to make, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's true. Now, so there are now emerging separate gay organizations who, I mean, what's interesting to me is that these organizations are in some way new, but they're also following the position that all the mainstream gay rights organizations who reject their approach followed until around 2015.
Yeah.
Stonewall did not said until 2015 we're broadly supportive of trans issues, but it's not our fight. And the Human Rights Campaign in the US had basically a similar approach. But I think, one of the things is, look, I am not saying that trans people do not deserve rights. I think, you should never be fired from your job, dress the way you want, call yourself what you want, make sure no one harasses anyone. All those rights are absolutely important. But the fact that they're important and desirable doesn't mean that they're the same campaign as gay rights. There's loads of campaigns like feminism, secularism, pro-choice that overlap somewhat with the gay rights movement's concerns, but that doesn't mean that they're the same campaign.
Right.
And also I'd say that, there are some areas of tension between the interests of gay people and trans people, particularly in relation to self-ID or women-only spaces, or the approach to children the approach that medicine should take to children who think that they're trans.
Yeah.
And that said, I could understand at the moment, particularly in the US, trans people feel under real pressure, and so I can see that they would feel very abandoned. And it's a lot easier not to get married than to get divorced. And most gay rights groups have gone down this road. So I think that the rollback should be done kind of fairly subtly and kind of gradually. Shouldn't be an open repudiation, because I think that I can see why trans people would be upset by that. But it's not working for them either, right? I think the gay rights movement is overreached, and some of the things it's asked for, particularly wanting companies to do all these great kind of active validation things. But I also think the trans movement, it's their movement, is not for me to advise them, but some of the asks they have made have been counterproductive, and merging themselves into the gay rights movement so that it's this big LGBTQ plus open-ended revolutionary change program. That's not working for them either. Their numbers are going all the wrong way.
Let's pick that apart. I mean, the reason why the overreach is the postmodern idealistic belief that very American belief, incidentally, that if you just think you can abolish material reality just by thinking you're something that it doesn't exist. Therefore, you can abolish biological sex just by saying I feel like I'm a woman, and that makes you a woman, even though your biology says no, you're not. You're a man. That is where the overreach lies. That is different from saying trans people with genuine gender dysphoria, and all kinds of people call themselves trans. Once again, you get lost. You get a bit lost. Should be absolutely protected. There are European court decisions on this going back to the 1990s. That is a different thing, and one reason why gay and lesbian people are speaking out on this, because you're same-sex attracted, and you can't say that someone who says they're from another sex but isn't attracts you. Is that fair?
Yeah, and actually, one of the interesting things is if you go back to those European Court decisions, European Court of Human Rights in 2002 ruled that a trans woman had the right to marry a man, and winning that case required trans actors to say, we're not looking for same-sex marriage, this is a different issue, we just want the right of a trans woman to marry a man, and the court said yes. They rightly separated themselves from gay rights activism when it was in their interests. Same, there was a case, P&S versus Cornwall Council, the European Court of Justice, the EU Court in the 1990s. And that case was won by trans rights people, saying that actually discrimination against someone on the grounds that they've had gender reassignment is contrary to EU law. And again, in that case, they had to say, we're not saying it's about sexual orientation, we're saying it's about gender reassignment. So they rightly separated themselves from gay rights claims when they needed to. And I think that's the right thing to do. And there's no reason why it's always kind of slightly, I don't fully understand why people are so resistant to the idea of gay people being able to define their movement and argue for their own rights. It just seems, I don't think if you think about it, the gay rights movement overlaps with the racial justice movement or for African Americans, but they don't want to add another B for Black into LGBTQIA plus because they recognize that there's overlaps, but there are differences. And that's fine. And I think in the context where gay and trans people together are still less than 5% of the population, both groups need the flexibility to make the pitches for straight majority support that is the most effective for their group. Whatever they're doing now, LGBTQ plus, is not working. The numbers are going wrong for gay rights and for trans rights. And as I said, their interests don't always overlap. So I don't understand fully the resistance to this. I don't understand telling gay people you must team up with this wider group, otherwise you're letting them down. Well, are we not letting down Black people by not teaming with them? Are they letting us down by not teaming with us? I mean, it doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, it's always been a hope of the post-60s left, hasn't it? That there'll be a rainbow coalition. That they will be able to gather all these minorities together, they will form a majority and win. Never actually happened. And they never ask what happens when the colours of the rainbow clash, what happens when interests clash.
Yeah.
It's always assumed that if you're gay, you must be left-wing. Well, why? Why? The only reason you'll be left-wing is because you're being persecuted. Once that persecution goes, you are free, and you're free to be, if you're a wealthy gay guy with a load of money who likes the monarchy and tradition and whatever, you can just be that. That is the aim of emancipation.
Well, because I think that is with the queer part of the LGBTQ, what I quite object to is that this idea that queer means other, means outsider, means rebel. And the problem actually for most gay people was that back in 1990 or 1980, if you were gay, you were queer whether you wanted it or not. You were outside of mainstream society. And the triumph of the gay rights movement was, if now in 2025, if you are gay and you want to be a rebel and an outsider, great. But you don't have that role inflicted on you whether you want it or not. And the idea that there's an inherent link between queer and gay permanently assigns this role of outsider to gay people, whether they want it or not. And I think that's actually really unfair. And I think especially when say opposite sex attracted people say, oh, I'm queer because I feel like a rebel and outsider, therefore I'm in your group. That to me is really tone deaf to the history of involuntary exclusion of gay people. It's really, I think people should think twice and think, well, maybe the role of outsider has been painful for gay people before saying, oh yeah, I'm an outsider, I'm part of you. And I think also to realize that when the approach that says, oh, gays are part of this broad coalition, there's always on the kind of one side of politics, I think gay people need to realize that that's people instrumentalizing gay people for their own political aims. If you say, oh no, they're just part of our coalition, they're not thinking about the interests of gay people themselves. They're thinking about their overall revolutionary project, and in which they think gay people can be a useful foot soldier.
Right. Okay, Ronan. You say essentially your book, and please correct me if I'm wrong, says the radicalization of Stonewall after 2015, after Ben Summerskill leaves Stonewall in 2015, is endangering gay people because it's provoking a reaction. If I can just read you a little bit of it. You say, if the LGBT plus movement insists that only a homophobe and social conservative would resist the presence of biological males in women's sport, then you risk a significant section of the public backtracking on their acceptance of gay rights more generally and responding, okay, fine, I'm a homophobe. Yeah. If you have to condemn J.K. Rowling as bigot, people just say, okay, I'm a bigot then, because they're pushing it too far. Politically, they've put themselves in a mad situation where they have to defend men playing women's sports, Nicola Sturgeon sending rapists to women's prisons. I mean, politically, no intelligent movement could ever allow itself, I think, to get into that space. But aren't you blaming the radicals? Aren't you letting, if you like, conservative opinion off the hook? Aren't you saying to conservatives, oh, you just hold your hand up and say, oh, it's not me, it's not my problem, those nasty leftists made me do it, then ran away. Is that a fair criticism of your work?
Well, so I'm not saying that there are not plenty of conservative people who are only dying to roll back gay rights. I think that is the case. And the real problem, well, because there's so many other books that have addressed the issues around some of the claims made in the name of trans rights, that I didn't want to get into that in the book. I was
Okay.
interested in the overconfidence it showed. Because I remember seeing outside my place in London this poster saying "No pride without trans pride," and I thought, oh, what? And I got thinking, what is behind that? I think what's behind that is that they're thinking, okay, if we can, gay marriage is popular, gay employment protections, etc., are popular. Now, if we can leverage the support for that and tell people it's a package deal, if you're on board with gay marriage, you have to be on board with biological males in women's sports or any of those issues. And I think that shows real overconfidence. They thought that they could almost kind of leverage the success of gay rights and to encourage people to set their doubts out aside about other more radical claims. And I think that just shows overconfidence. Until 2015, all the main gay rights movements thought, stay away from this, it's too dangerous. And they lost their fear and they thought, yeah, we can leverage our success. We can use it for more radical ends. And actually, what they're not noticing is, no, they're making the homophobes' case for them. History is not on the cheering gay rights on. And actually, people are more likely to reconsider their support for gay rights than they are to set aside their doubts. And even you think about from the other side, I mean, because I don't think the approach is working for trans people, but even if it was, thinking like in Iran, there is some limited degree of trans rights recognized by the regime, but gay sex has the death penalty. It'd be mad for trans rights.
Sorry, Ron, I think you need to explain why the Iranian theocracy does that.
Well, I mean, actually, Ayatollah Khomeini wrote a fatwa quite soon after the revolution saying, well, it's gay sex, death. But if people have medically transition, he thinks that Shia Islam can accept them as, for sexual purposes, members of the opposite sex. And so there's some, I mean, still, I think there's a lot of prejudice and trans people don't have it easy in Iran, but there's some degree of trans rights are recognized. If the trans rights movement in Iran then said to the Iranian government, no, LGBTQ plus, it's a package deal, no trans rights without gay rights, it wouldn't mean that as I said in the book, the Ayatollahs would start doing gay marriages. They would reconsider their support for trans rights. It'd also be mad for Russian feminists or Afghan feminists to say no women's rights without lesbian rights. It would just be counterproductive. And if you make it into a package deal, you maximize opposition. And there is loads of conservative opposition. I get very frustrated with a lot of, even some of the reactions to my book, right, and people saying, oh yeah, J.D. Vance and the late Charlie Kirk, they just wanted to correct the excesses of the gay rights movement. No, they don't. They didn't. There is this powerful part of conservative opinion that wants to get rid of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And by making gay rights appear part of a movement that challenges all conservatives' cherished norms, they make gay rights their top target, and they alienate moderate conservative support that the gay rights movement absolutely will need to be long-term viable.
You are listening to The Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. Our guest this week is Ronan McCrea, professor, academic, but crucially for our purposes, the author of an alarming book on the gay revolution in danger. Ronan, I was trying to put myself, walking other people's shoes, and I was thinking about a young gay guy from Ireland, like you when you were young. And he could say to you, Ronan, you write very, very well of growing up in an island that was still sort of De Valera's island. It was still sort of saturated with Catholicism, saturated with prejudice. You describe your grandparents you absolutely loved, you thought terrific, but those same grandparents would say gay men should be killed, should be executed, should burn in hell. And this young Irish guy might say to you, you know, Ronan, De Valera's island is dead and gone, dead and in its grave, as Yeats might say. It's just gone. And I'm a gay guy, like you were X number of years ago. I won't ask how many years ago. And we've just got different concerns. And we say, when you say you are provoking the right, you are engaging in strategic mistakes and alienating moderate opinion and letting the bigots back in the game, we say, fuck the bigots. We're here to fight them. And if after the murder of Charlie Kirk, as seems possible incidentally, um, the US government turns on trans people in the US, because there is a kind of trans connection to the murder. We'll wait and see what happens. They're certainly capable of it. We will be the first to defend them. And we don't want to hear words of caution from, you know, forgive me, old guys of your generation. How would you respond to that?
So a couple of things. One, I'd say, look, I've asked myself that question too. Am I kind of scarred by my experience of growing up in a kind of homophobic society, and that means I've got this hypervigilance, you know. But so I mean, it's up to people to make their own minds about that. But I think there's a few things about that. One is actually there is no again in politics, and people think, oh no, that's all been done. You know, the disputes that we now have about the kind of more radical claims of the LGBTQ movement are just a rerun of the 1960s civil rights movement in the US or the 1990s, 2000s gay rights movement. And actually, I think that's just not right. The issues are different, the societies are different. Second, the idea that homophobia has been permanently vanquished because in a few Western countries that has been the case for a couple of decades is just, it's end of history thinking. You know, we thought in the 1990s that liberal democracy had seen all its enemies off, and you know, Trump wasn't in the script, Putin wasn't in the script, Orban wasn't in the script. You know, we've given up on end of history thinking in relation to everything else, but it seems to lumber on in zombie form in gay rights. That, you know, this, for some reason, the tolerance and equality of gay people, which lasts 20 to 30 years max after literally centuries of oppression, and which in most of the world is still the case, is somehow this thing is over. And look, I mean, I think partly my perspective and people who are like over 40, we remember what it was like. And so we know that like very nice people who you lived with can also be very anti-gay. That's just, and you know, if you go on holidays outside of the West, you'll meet loads of really nice people, but in many of the countries, the overwhelming likelihood is that those people will not be gay friendly. Most of the world lives in societies in which homosexuality is very much deprecated and discriminated, and gay people are discriminated against. So we shouldn't make, I think that approach mistakes a couple of decades in a limited part of the world for a permanent resolution of history in all of the world. And that just hasn't happened. And even in our own societies, the numbers are now going down. So I would think that person is suffering from the illusion that the last 20 years represents the end of history, and that something that is inherently vulnerable is invulnerable, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, I did think that was one of the most convincing parts of your book, incidentally. Yeah, I hate this slogan, the right side of history, or even that line, the arc of history bends towards justice. It stops people, it gives a sense of inevitability, it stops people fighting, it stops people arguing, think, why do I need to do anything? I mean, I really liked that Anne Applebaum was talking about an American politician she was at an event with, and someone said, oh, the arc of history bends towards justice. And the politician said, not without help, it doesn't. In other words, unless you fight for it, Nothing,
Yes.
you are going to lose. But forgive me, I still think you sort of duck the question. Should gay people and gay
Oh,
organisations
yeah.
then just cut loose trans rights and the whole LGBTQ, forgive me, plus, etc., thing, and just say we're gays, we're lesbians, we're here to protect same-sex relationships, same-sex equality. Other people, we wish you luck, but you're on your own, mate.
So I don't think there should be a public repudiation, no, because actually I just think it's too. If I can see good reasons why trans people in the US are now very afraid. I
Oh, yeah.
can, and yeah, and I'm sure there must be way more street harassment and stuff like that. That's terrible. And someone who's gender dysphoria, that's a tough old road. So, and while I think it was a big mistake to merge the movements in the way that's been done, I don't I don't think an abrupt divorce and public divorce would be fair because once you merge, that gives you some responsibility. But I do think that both sides should wind it down. They should just start subtly giving space for separate cases to be made by the T element and the LGB element, and the Q plus element. I don't know where that really fits in anyway, because I think yes, but I'm not. That doesn't worry me as much. But I think that there needs to be a very carefully managed, subtle, gradual unwinding. And I said, so that 10 years down the line or 5 years, the cases are clearly being made that these are separate organizations, separate campaigns. Each campaign may make arguments. I'm thinking about self-ID or treatment of gender dysphoria children that the other side may not feel comfortable with, and that's fine. But yeah, I think that having merged, it would be harsh to immediately and publicly repudiate now when trans people feel under such pressure. But I do think long term it's in the interest of both, because we both need to be able to separately pitch to the straight majority to say, this is the tweak we need. You don't need to change much for us. We just need this tweak. Now, for the trans rights movement, I think they probably have to rethink things like self-ID, because I mean, it's not my business because it's their movement, but I think that's been a political disaster for them.
Yeah.
But and sports, I mean, that's just they're never going to win on that. The numbers are now of support. I think in the UK it's 12% of people support biological males and women's sports. I think they need to do it in their own interest, but also in the interest of the gay rights movement, because people don't realize we're heading into tougher territory for a whole load of political, demographic, and cultural reasons. I mean, essentially, if you look at young people in the UK now, they are much more sexually conservative than they were 20 years ago. There was a survey in the Times that showed that in 2004, 78% of young people, said they or their friends commonly had one-night stands. It's now 23%. The number of young people saying that marriage was irrelevant has gone from 39% to 21%. There's a switch back. And look at Andrew Tate, his popularity. Look at the kind of trad wife phenomenon. There's an increase in attendance at Christian services now. Young Muslim population is very devout and growing. All of those things mean that the factors that have meant that the gay rights movement had the wind at its back. Because even in the 90s, when things were much worse, the movement still felt it had the cultural winds at its back. That's no longer the case. Things are about to get a lot worse. Think how quickly they changed in the US, the corporate stampede away from gay rights that we saw after Trump was re-elected. Things are about to get worse, and we need to concentrate on keeping moderate straight support and hanging on to what we have. Because if we have half that, what we have now in 50 years' time, we're still doing better than gay people have done for nearly all of history.
I can see, I mean, it's a very strong argument, but I can see why people might dislike it, because you are saying you are saying the whole time we are faced with a threat of homophobia, Putin, Trump movement, and we need to be boring to beat it. We need to be away from radical declarations. We need to be away from confrontation, away from revolution. Gay rights are not revolutionary. It's equality, it's not revolution. Gay rights is the right to be boring, is the right to be normal, is the right to be conservative. And once that's won, there's no reason at all why gay people should be particularly left-wing or particularly challenging. And obviously, the whole world of Judith Butler hates that. They absolutely hate it. They think your sexuality or your skin color or your religion should be a radicalizing force. And of course, once you remove prejudice, then there's nothing radicalizing about it. But can you see why you've got quite a hard sell with that line? Because it
Yeah.
doesn't. Because particularly when it's very easy to say, for me to say, you fight someone like Trump. It's like anti-fascism in the 30s. You fight them. You've got to get moderate conservative support away from the extreme right to win, and that's true. But you have to do a hell of a lot of compromises to do that. It's not a very attractive position for people.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's certainly intoxicating to think I'm part of this broad revolutionary movement which will establish utopia. It's very exciting to think history's on your side. It's really wonderful to think that the future will always be better, but it won't. And if you think of the interest just of gay people, not of revolutionary movements, power oscillates between liberals and conservatives, between left and right, generally in the political system over time. We need a form of gay rights that can survive whether liberals or conservatives are in the ascendant. And it's true that liberals have been, the liberals and left wing have generally been more of a friend to gay people than the right has been. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't answer the question of what's in our interest. It's not about fighting less, it's about fighting smarter. Because we need, I would think one of my areas is EU law, and one of the problems the EU has got into with dealing with Viktor Orban is thinking that there is some kind of solution to his radical conservatism. And I think they need to be harsh on things like misspending money, judicial independence. But they think that if there's some magic formula that will make illiberal and conservative worldviews go away, and there isn't. I think the progressive project really gets into trouble when it thinks that it can make, if only it tries hard enough, competing worldviews will go away. That's not the case. Conservatives are around to stay. In fact, people who are anti-gay are around to stay. They're still most of the world population. We need to find a form of gay rights that at least does not appall the very large proportion of the electorate that is conservative, that can peel off as many moderate conservatives as possible. And that's not fun because it means we're pitching to straight people. And, no one likes to have to be pitched to straight people, but that's the tragic reality of being a group that is under 5% of the population everywhere in the world. There is it'd be lovely if gay people could say, screw you, we're not going to think about what straight people think of us. We're just going to get on and determine our own future. But until they form some gay microstate, that's not going to happen. That's just the tragic reality of gay politics. We will always depend on what I call in the book the kindness of strangers, and that is the straight majority.
Look, Ronan, that's been absolutely terrific. On that note of tragic realism, because realism is normally tragic, I'd like to thank you so much for appearing on the Lowdown. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. Your book is out now, is it not?
It's out, yeah. It's out. All good bookshops.
Called The End of the Gay Rights Revolution, comes garlanded with praise from Stephen Fry and Yascha Mounk and Yuval Harari and all the gay great and the good. If you've liked this podcast, could you give us a nice rating on Spotify or Apple or whatever app you're listening for? You're listening on. It helps spread the word. It helps move us up the league tables. They have league tables of podcasts, if you can imagine such a thing. If you like my work, you can read me on Substack. Nick Cohen, writing from London. Just Google Nick Cohen Substack. It just comes up. It's dead easy. It's dead easy to find. I must also thank you for listening and say that until next time, goodbye.